I never imagined I'd be telling this story. Some secrets aren't meant to be spoken aloud, let alone relived word for word. But it won't leave me. No matter how many mornings I wake up pretending it never happened, the memory clings like a whisper on the back of my neck, quiet, cold, persistent. It started like any other evening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing out of place. The air was heavy with summer, thick enough to press against your skin. I had been staying at Ava's place for a week, just helping out. She had always been there for me ever since college. We were the kind of friends who could go months without talking and pick up right where we left off. Her husband had walked out on her 2 years ago. Left her with a mortgage, a job that barely paid the bills, and a teenage son she barely understood anymore. That's where I came in, auntie, to the rescue. I'd always had a soft spot for him. For both of them, really. But with her son Noah, there was something more complicated. I told myself I loved him like family, like a nephew. That's what Ava thought too, that I was this calm, grounding influence in his life. She used to joke that I should have been his mother, not her. We'd laugh, but it always felt like something more than a joke. Noah was 17, too young to know anything about the real world, but old enough to wear the pain of it on his face. He was quiet, brooding sometimes, but with a sharpness in his eyes that told you he saw things, felt things more deeply than he let on. I used to catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not in a childish way, not even in a flirtatious way, just watching. Like he was trying to understand something about me I didn't even understand myself. That night, I was in the kitchen late cleaning up. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Ava had gone to bed early, exhausted from work. I assumed Noah was in his room, buried under his headphones or whatever music teenagers drown themselves in these days. Then I heard the soft creak of the stairs. He didn't say anything when he entered. Just walked in barefoot, his hair tousled and face unreadable. I glanced over my shoulder and smiled, instinctively maternal. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He shook his head and leaned against the doorway. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit," I said, drying the last glass. He didn't laugh. He just stared at me. Not rudely, not awkwardly, just intently. I felt something shift in the air, then almost imperceptibly. A thread pulling taut between us, the kind you pretend not to notice but can't deny is there. "I keep thinking about leaving," he said finally. My hands paused. Leaving this house, this town, everything. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. I turned to face him. He looked older in that moment. Tired, like he'd been carrying a weight no one else could see. "You belong here, Noah. Your mom loves you. She's doing her best." He gave a half smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I know. It's just, sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own life." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder gently. "You're not alone in feeling that way. It's part of growing up. Everyone walks through that fog at some point." He looked down at where my hand rested, then back up at me. His eyes held something I couldn't name, not yet. Longing, anger, loneliness wrapped in curiosity. I wish someone really saw me," he said. And there it was, the thing I'd been ignoring. The silent bridge between us suddenly lit up with emotion too complex to name. "I see you," I whispered before I could stop myself. His breath caught barely. "Do you?" I should have stepped back. I should have said goodnight and walked upstairs and buried the moment under the weight of responsibility. But I didn't. I stayed, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged. He moved a step closer. I didn't move back. I didn't move at all. "I think about you," he said, voice barely above a breath. "More than I should." My heart was pounding now. My brain screamed at me to shut this down, to draw a line, to remind him and myself of who we were to each other. But I said nothing. I just stood there drowning in the tension. I told myself I didn't want this, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I was just listening, just being there for a kid who needed someone. But deep down, I knew I'd let something fester. A quiet, emotional attachment that had grown roots in places I never thought it would. "Noah," I said softly finally. He took another step. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to stop feeling this." And the worst part, I didn't either. That moment hung between us like smoke. We didn't touch. Not yet. But the emotional boundary had already been crossed. And once that line is blurred, truly blurred, it doesn't matter what you do next. The damage is already done. I stepped away, finally putting distance between us. "You should go to bed," I said, my voice tight. He nodded, but didn't leave. He stood there for a second longer, like he was waiting for something, permission maybe. And then he turned and disappeared up the stairs. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every breath shallow. My skin still felt warm from his presence. My chest ached, not with desire, but with confusion, guilt, maybe even grief, because something innocent had died in that kitchen, and I couldn't bring it back. The next morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I made coffee, fried eggs, opened the blinds, the usual routine. But nothing felt usual. The light was too bright. The silence too loud. When Noah came downstairs, his eyes didn't meet mine. He mumbled a tired morning and poured himself a bowl of cereal like nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way he avoided the kitchen counter where we stood the night before. I could feel it in myself, like my skin remembered something my mouth refused to say. Ava didn't notice. She never did. She was juggling too much meetings, Aaron's life. She was grateful I was around to help. "You're such a blessing," she told me that afternoon, pressing my hand. I smiled, but it stung. The weight of that word blessing sat on my chest like a stone. That night, I stayed in my room. I didn't come down for tea like I normally did. I avoided the hallway, the stairs, the chance of running into him again. But silence only makes the mind louder. I kept hearing his voice. "I think about you." His eyes, those eyes kept flashing in my memory, and I hated myself for not hating it. The days blurred. We didn't talk about it. We didn't acknowledge it. But the air between us stayed thick, buzzing with things unsaid. There was a magnetism now, one we both danced around like moths circling a flame. I told myself it would pass, that I just needed space-time clarity. But when you're that close to a line, even the wind feels like temptation. It was a Thursday when it happened. Ava had been called away for an overnight work trip. She asked me to stay the night just in case Noah needed anything. "He listens to you more than he listens to me?" She laughed. "Honestly, I think you're the only one who gets him." I wanted to say no. I wanted to make up an excuse. But my mouth betrayed me, of course. "Don't worry." That evening, it was just the two of us in the house. The quiet was unbearable. We ate in the living room, watching some mindless movie neither of us paid attention to. He sat on the far side of the couch. I curled up on the opposite end. We didn't talk much, except for a few comments about the film. Still, I could feel it, the hum beneath the silence. When the movie ended, he stood up and stretched. "I'm gonna get some air," he said, heading for the backyard. I nodded, pretending to scroll on my phone. A few minutes passed before I followed him out like I wasn't thinking about it, like I just happened to need the breeze too. He was sitting on the back steps, hood up, head down. I sat a few feet away, pulling my sweater tighter. The night air was crisp, the kind that made everything feel sharper. More real. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know." We sat in silence for a long time. The stars above us blinked indifferently. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The world went on oblivious to the storm inside me. "I meant what I said," he murmured. That night, I wasn't confused. I closed my eyes. "Noah, you're 17. I'm not a child." "No, but I stopped. I didn't even know how to finish that sentence. I wasn't his mother. I wasn't a stranger. I wasn't innocent either." "I know what this is," he said. "It's not just me. You feel it too." I opened my mouth to deny it, to say something rational, something right. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right. I did feel it. I had tried to bury it under every rule I knew, but it had bloomed anyway, wild, uncontrollable wrong. "I can't," I said finally, my voice breaking. "You didn't stop me the other night. That's exactly why I have to stop it now." He looked at me, then really looked. His face was full of everything I had ignored for too long: pain, hope, longing, resentment. Why does it matter what anyone thinks if it's real? Because some things cross lines you can't uncross. The silence that followed was thick with heartbreak, for both of us. He stood slowly, brushing off his hands. "I should go inside." I nodded, eyes burning. "Good night, Noah." He lingered as if he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned and walked inside, leaving me in the cold. I stayed outside for a long time after that, watching the stars, listening to the wind. I kept thinking of Ava, her kindness, her trust. How she had welcomed me into her home without hesitation. How she believed in me, confided in me. And how I had let something take root in her house that should never have existed. When I finally went to bed, I locked the door behind me. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I no longer trusted myself. The morning after, I pretended everything was fine again. But something had changed in Noah. He was quieter, sharper in the way he moved. He didn't look at me, didn't speak unless spoken to. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like disappointment. And I couldn't blame him. I'd opened a door I had no right to even glance at, and then slammed it shut, as if he was the one who did something wrong. Ava came home that afternoon, bags in hand, energy high from her trip. She kissed her son on the head, laughed with him in the kitchen, and thanked me for holding down the fort. I smiled. I joked. I stood in her kitchen with her and chopped vegetables like nothing in the world was off kilter. But inside, I was cracking open. The guilt settled in like fog, not just for what almost happened, but for what I felt, for the way I looked forward to his presence even when I shouldn't, for the way his silence wounded me, for the ache I carried like a bruise that wouldn't heal. I thought space would help. So I told Ava I had work piling up back home, which wasn't a complete lie. She hugged me tight, told me how much she appreciated everything I'd done. Noah stood behind her in the doorway, saying nothing. Our eyes met for the briefest second, and in that second, I saw the fracture, the hurt, the goodbye neither of us could voice. Weeks passed. I buried myself in routine, emails, grocery runs, laundry, the kind of life that doesn't ask difficult questions. But I couldn't sleep. Not really. I kept replaying every moment, every word, every look that led us down that path. One night late, my phone buzzed. Noah. I stared at the screen thumb hovering over the message preview. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. I just needed to feel something. Anything. It broke me because I understood. God help me, I understood. I typed and erased a dozen replies. The truth was, I didn't know what to say. How do you explain a feeling that shouldn't exist? How do you comfort someone whose pain you accidentally nurtured? In the end, I wrote, "You matter. You always have. But I can't be what you want me to be." He didn't respond. After that, the silence grew deeper. We didn't speak again. Not really. But Ava called now, and then told me Noah was applying to schools, thinking of studying psychology, maybe writing. "He's grown up so much," she said. "You helped him more than you know?" The irony of that nearly made me laugh. She never knew. She probably never will. To her, I'll always be the friend who stepped in, helped her son through a hard time. The blessing. Sometimes, I wish I could go back to the version of me that walked into her home that summer. The version who thought lines were easy to draw, easy to keep. The version who didn't know how complicated the heart could be, or how easy it was to misplace your sense of right and wrong when it feels like someone finally sees you. There's no clean ending to this story. No dramatic confrontation. No affair. No scandal. Just a moment. A moment that should have passed like all the others, but didn't. A moment that left its mark on both of us, quiet and permanent. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if he remembers it the same way I do. If he looks back with shame or sorrow, or if he too carries that lingering, what if that never quite lets go? But that's the thing about forbidden moments. They don't need to last long to last forever. 3 months passed before I saw him again. It was unexpected, a gallery downtown, a student exhibit. Ava had mentioned it in passing that Noah had submitted a photography piece and was going to be there. I told her I might drop by even though I knew I would. I'd been rehearsing it in my head for days, crafting a version of myself calm enough to stand in the same room with him. The gallery was modest, tucked between a bookstore and a tea shop, with soft lights and quiet music playing in the background. I came alone. I didn't tell Ava I was there. I just walked slowly through the displays, pretending I was just another stranger with a coat and a coffee and too many thoughts in her head. Then I saw it. A photograph, stark, beautiful, arresting. A single chair in an empty room, light spilling in through half-closed blinds. The caption beneath it read, "Where no one sees, Noah L." I felt the breath leave my lungs. It wasn't the image that crushed me. It was what I felt behind it. Loneliness, silence, the kind of quiet pain that isn't screamed or sobbed, but lived through in stillness. I knew that feeling. I had lived it too. And then, there he was, standing a few feet away, talking to someone, gesturing softly. He had grown not taller, not physically, but there was something in his posture now. Confidence, maybe, or resignation. He looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across that quiet, crowded room, and the world tilted for a second. He didn't smile. Neither did I. But something passed between us, not regret, not longing. Just understanding. Like two people who survived a storm, neither of them meant to start. He walked over, slowly, carefully. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. A pause, the kind that used to be filled with tension. Now it was just fragile peace. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice low. I wasn't sure I should. He nodded, looking down at the floor for a moment before glancing back at me. "Thank you for what you said in the message. It helped, more than I let on." I wanted to say more, to apologize again, to explain the ache I still carried, but none of it would have made a difference. Because it wasn't about reliving the past anymore. It was about learning to live with it. "You're really talented," I said, nodding toward the photo. He smiled faintly. It's how I make sense of things. I looked back at the image, the empty chair, the light, the absence. It's beautiful, I whispered. Another pause. I don't hate you, he said softly. The words hit harder than I expected. I never did, I replied. Ava's voice rang out from across the room, calling his name. He turned, waved. She didn't see me? Not yet. When he turned back, he hesitated. You okay? I will be, I said. We both knew we wouldn't have another conversation like this again. It wasn't sadness, it was closure, the kind that doesn't come with grand gestures, but with eye contact and forgiveness no one had to ask for. Take care of her, I added, nodding toward Ava. His eyes softened. I will. And then he walked away. I stood there a moment longer, staring at that photo, the empty chair, the way the light touched the floor like a memory. I realized in that moment that we weren't meant to become anything more than what we had already been. A moment, a lesson, a scar. Not all stories end in fire or collapse. Some just fade into silence. But silence doesn't mean it didn't matter. I left the gallery without saying goodbye to Ava. It wasn't because I was ashamed. Not anymore. It was because I knew this wasn't my place to stay. That chapter, whatever it had been, was closed now. Quietly, without explosion or spectacle, just the way it had begun. On the train ride home, I watched the world blur by outside the window. Trees, streetlights, people living their lives unaware of the kind of silence that could echo through your chest long after words had stopped. I thought about all the choices I'd made that summer, the things I allowed to happen, the moments I didn't stop not because I wanted to cause harm, but because I was human, weak, needing to feel needed. It's strange how loneliness can disguise itself as love, how desire can masquerade as closeness. I loved Noah in some way, I still do, but not as a lover, not as anything that should have been. I loved him as a reflection of my own brokenness, my own ache to be seen, and I think he loved me the same way. Not for who I truly was, but for who I represented, someone who noticed, someone who listened. I never told anyone what happened. Not my sister, not my therapist, not even myself, not out loud. Because it wasn't about the physical. It never was. It was emotional trespass, a slow unraveling of boundaries too fragile to hold up under the weight of two aching hearts. And yet, I don't look back with hatred. I don't even look back with shame anymore. Just sorrow. Quiet sorrow, the kind that sits with you at night when the world has gone to sleep. The kind that keeps a light on in the corner of your mind, illuminating a room you never walk into, but never truly forget. Ava still calls sometimes. She still tells me stories about Noah, how he's thriving in college, how he volunteers at a youth center on weekends. She says he's growing into a good man, and I believe her. He always had that inside him. He just needed someone to remind him it was there. She once told me, he still talks about you, said you were the first person who ever really listened. That almost broke me, because listening wasn't enough. Listening in this case was dangerous. It cracked something open in both of us that should have stayed closed. There are days I wonder what would have happened if I'd drawn that line sooner, or harder, or not let the silence linger in the kitchen that night. But that's the thing about stories like this. They don't live in the dramatic decisions. They live in the hesitations, the almosts. The pauses where one word could have changed everything, but instead, nothing was said. and everything changed anyway. I've learned since then that boundaries are not just about protecting others. They're about protecting ourselves from becoming someone we don't recognize. Someone whose choices don't align with the person we thought we were. Noah and I, we were never lovers. But we shared something just as dangerous, unspoken longing. A mirror held up at the worst possible time. And Ava, she still doesn't know. And she probably never will. Because to her, I will always be the one who helped. The one who showed up when no one else did. And maybe that's the version of me that deserves to live on in her memory. Not the one who saw a storm coming and didn't move fast enough to close the door. I sometimes walk by that neighborhood. Not often. Just once in a while, when I happen to be nearby and my feet pull me there out of muscle memory or some unresolved need. The house looks the same. The paint a little more faded, the garden a little overgrown. The porch light still flickers the way it always did. I never go in. I wouldn't dare. But every time I pass it, I remember the sound of Ava's laughter in the kitchen, the smell of coffee in the early mornings, the way sunlight used to filter through the window and catch the dust in midair, making the ordinary look almost holy. And I remember Noah, not with guilt anymore, but with something more complex, more honest. I remember how he looked at me that night on the back steps, not as a boy looking for affection, but as someone drowning quietly and asking if I could hear the splash. And I did. I just didn't know how to pull him out without falling in too. There's a kind of love that isn't meant to last, that isn't meant to become anything. It exists in a space outside of time, delicate, dangerous, unforgettable. That's what he was. That's what we were. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I think about alternate versions of us. In some parallel world, maybe we met at a different time. Maybe he was older. Maybe I was younger. Maybe there were no lines to cross, no names to betray, no friendships to shatter. Maybe we could have been something real. But this is not that world. In this world, Ava trusted me. She opened her home to me. She believed I would protect what mattered most to her, her son, her life, her trust. And I did, almost. But almost isn't enough when you're playing with fire. I think the greatest damage we ever do isn't in the obvious betrayals. It's in the subtle ones. The ones we commit with a look, a silence, a moment where we should have turned away but didn't. People often ask what regret feels like. It feels like watching someone walk away and knowing that you will never ever be able to tell the truth. That the version of the story they carry in their heart, the version where you were kind and safe and good, is a version you're not sure you earned. It feels like being remembered for who you were supposed to be, while quietly carrying the burden of who you almost became. I don't write this as a confession hoping for forgiveness. I'm not seeking redemption or pity. I'm writing it because it's the truth, my truth. And maybe by speaking it aloud, I can finally lay it down. I'll never forget that summer. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. Because of the line we hovered over. Because of the silence we filled with meaning. Because of the questions I'll never stop asking, and the answers I hope he's no longer searching for. Wherever he is now, I hope he's happy. I hope he's found someone who sees him completely, not as a broken thing needing to be saved, but as a person strong enough to save himself. And as for me, I'm learning to be honest with myself, to sit with the discomfort of who I am, to accept that love, even in its most complicated, inappropriate forms, doesn't make you evil. It just makes you human. But humanity doesn't excuse everything. It doesn't undo the damage. It just helps you understand it. So this is where I leave that part of the story. Not wrapped in a bow, not rewritten to feel easier, just as it was. Raw, imperfect, real. A woman, a boy, a moment, a trust that was never supposed to bend and almost broke. And the silence that followed. Not because we didn't care, but because we did.